Might be muted.
Okay, Mike, are you now again presenter? So you show the share screen platform. If you start.
And Andrea, will you be able to hand over the presenter role to Kate when Monika needs to hand it over? Is that something you can do?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay, great. So he can just do it, and then I don't have to learn the right language.
Yeah.
They're always on the wrong side, as far as I'm concerned.
No problem. Okay, so it looks like we've got some folks showing up here, so we might as well start to get this started. Did you want to share your screen, Monika?
Oh, okay, I can do that.
I'm assuming you're starting the talk?
So can you see a blank screen?
Yes.
And now you should see my browser.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and then I'll go ahead and do a little intro here, and then Monika, are you starting, or is Kate going to start?
And then Kate will take over.
Okay. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do my usual intro. So I'm just kind of reminding everybody today, of course, that this is our, I'm trying to remember how many we have now. Is this our fourth or fifth presentation? But this is the one from both Kate. I'm looking up Kate's last name. Sorry, Kate. Pechekhonovarina. I tried. Kate and Monika Mevenkamp are going to do a presentation here on their UI prototype using Ruby on Rails and Bootstrap. Before we get started, though, I do want to remind everyone that the role of these presentations is to sort of get a feel for the framework that our developers are working in, to see if the framework looks like it would be beneficial for DSpace UI going forward. The flashiness of the presentation or of the actual prototypes is not necessarily something we're judging on, but it's great if you had time to do something a little bit cool and flashy. If not, no worries. It's more about looking at the framework and what sort of things you did. And as always, we're going to start things off more with a background of what Monika and Kate did for about the first 30 minutes or so, and then after that we'll get more into discussion and Q&A with anybody who's here today. And this is, of course, being recorded for later on. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand this on over to Monika, so you can go ahead and get started, Monika.
Okay, great. So this is Monika. Oh, I should start at the beginning. That's always a good idea. So Kate and I, we joined together at the Blacklight Challenge in Princeton when we met in the fall, and so we both have Rails experience, and we decided to join, but then we never joined our prototype, so that's why you're going to see two different presentations. So before I start off with my demo implementation, a few words on Rails and Bootstrap. So I really like Rails. It has a clean MVC implementation, strong testing framework. It's based on Ruby, so you get a quick turnaround with the interpretive language features there. It's widely used, so there are lots of mature gems out there. I'm using DWise, which handles all the authorization, authentication for my application. There's internationalization. There's Blacklight, which is the gem that Kate uses in her prototype. There are IDE integrations. I use IntelliJ IDEA. There's eClass, whatever you like. There's automatic document generation if you do annotate your code. And an extra plus, I think, for DSpace is that Hydra is now part of DuraSpace. So there is Rails experience within the DuraSpace community from the Hydra side. On the CSS side, well, Bootstrap is sort of what I happen to know. It's what the JSP UI uses. It does its job. I'm not particularly religious about it, and that's independent decisions. What CSS framework you go and what web framework you go with. So starting into the demo that I put together, I have a live site at Heroku, so people can poke around there. There's 4 areas I'm going to talk about. UI customizations that I did with layouts and overrides. Then I have a couple editable view settings or view configurations, and I thought about authorization, and then there under the hood, the application is actually using a gem for the REST integration. So we had in other presentations people talk about the gem. Basically, their gems, what they do is they give objects to the Rails application, and under the hood all the REST stuff is happening. And potentially what you could do, you could trade that out and put a gem in place that does JRuby, goes right to the Java API. As long as you provide the same kind of interface, you could switch that out without any effort. What I started out with the application is I added an extra parameter to the URL. So URLs start out with a layout name, and then all the other parts that you have in the Rails URL. You have controller, action, object IDs, things like that. The way it's done, it's really easy. Ruby has this concept of routes, and that handles all the mapping from URL to where things should go. That's a really nice feature, and that's why I added the layout part. But it's best explained with what I did with an example. So if you look, for example, at how I show a community controller, you can look at this in the core layout. It's one layout that I defined, and I have to be careful to click the right link here, and the default layout. So the core layout looks like this, default layout like this, so it's kind of similar. What happens under the hood is that the core is the first part of the URL. So the parameters that are sent into this whole pipeline has a layout parameter of core, and then the usual stuff, community controller, show action on object 102. This black part under the bottom, at the bottom is actually a little debug thing that I put together partly for my own purposes and partly because it makes explaining things easier. So what you see here, because I have core layout, the rendering starts with this core HTML ERB file from the layouts directory. What happens in the other case, of course, it's kind of the same, but you start out with the default HTML ERB. So it's all about naming conventions in Rails. Then I adopted the application controller, which all controllers are deriving from application controller. So I added something called do always, which is triggered before anything else happens. And this do always is a custom implementation I did that does a lot of like the overriding mechanisms. In this case, in the core layout, nothing exciting happens. You do always thing. You set your DSpace object resolve configuration to your render. In the default layout, you know, there's this extra function here, default do layout, naming conventions again. And this is triggered by the do always function. And it uses this nice Ruby ability where you can ask an object, hey, do you know how to do default do always? Do you have that method? If so, I'm going to call it. If it's not there, well, obviously it's not going to be called. And so the do always method, I'm not going to show the code. But what it does, it computes this explore communities variable, which basically is a list of top communities. And because now in the controller pipeline, we can guarantee that that variable is computed on every action that's performed in the default layout, the layout file here can rely on the variable being there and populate an explore menu right up at the top. So that's nice. Like you can't really do custom layouts without doing changes in the controller pipeline. So this does take care of that. So I'm going to skip the next example, but go for another kind of override that I did. And the controller override in this one you can combine. So looking at the core again, it's an item page, so you have the relevant parameters, and it's the same thing. You always say DSpace object resolve configurations render, but it renders a default template called by Rails conventions. It's the item show template. In this case, there's an override in place. First of all, of course, we start with the library template. But then there is nothing happening in the controller pipeline, but then when it comes to rendering, the application controller, the changes that I did, looks for whether there's a file in the library directory that's an item show override, and then uses that file to render the content. And the use case I have in mind here is, say, your university library, all they're interested in is having nifty links to the item pages, but they want to have a heavy customization. All they need to do would define a layout that takes care of header, sidebar, footer the way they want, and then have an override for the actual item. do it the way they like, and then you're done. You have to add 2 files to the application. So that's how much I'm going to say about overrides for now. View configurations. So their purpose is to basically parameterize a view to do one thing or the other. The standard example is, of course, on an item display page, which metadata values are going to show. And the way I set this up is these configurations are stored in the database. They can be edited. Of course, it's not fully implemented. And configuration values have, I call them a configuration type. It's basically a name and a type, a class. So you have an application name string or an item display, which can be a hash. It's supposed to be a hash. Then, of course, they have a value, and the values are stored in the database, and they're stored in YAML, so you can have more complex objects than just like your basic types. And then they have a scope. And the way I use scopes, I will allow them to be empty, then the value you're defining would be default value that everybody would know about. If you scope it on a handle string, then that's supposed to mean in this community collection, whatever the handle is for, everything inside should use this value for the configuration. So what you can do is you can define a default value, you can find maybe a value on a community, and then you have a special collection in the community, you override it again. The way this is done or realized is that there's this resolve config method that you saw before listed. Right before rendering, configurations are resolved. At that point, you know whether the page is talking about a DSpace object. If it does, you can peel out the handle, you can peel out the handle of the parent, and then you can go through the motions of deciding which configuration should be active. And so the configurations, they are being made available to the views in this C_config variable. So let's look at an example. This would be the configuration, and this is where they're active. Always need 2 links. So the configurations we have here in this example application is there's an application name. There's only one variable, and it happens to be DSpace demo. I could go ahead and change it, and then it will be changed. There's a contact email, which I use here. And then there's item display, which is really the interesting one. So that's the one we're going to look at. And item display, come on. Are other people clicking around on the application?
No, not right now.
That's sad. Come on, maybe I didn't click properly. There we go. So you see it's a hash. It has 2 values. It defines a list for when you want detailed information, you want another list for when you want to do these one-line things. And the default for the one-line things is a couple of metadata values. For this object, which happens to be a community, I have a shorter description for the short metadata list. So what I do with hashes, I merge them on the keys. So looking at that particular community, you should see here in the instance variables that are traced in the debug panel that the item, the item display variable here has the 2 fields, and the short metadata list is the short list, but the detailed list is whatever comes from the default value. So not surprisingly, if you click on a collection, we're going to have the same values down there, and we just see titles here. Whereas if we go to like the College of Dentistry, we see the default value in the configurations down here, and if we start listing collections, then we have the author, the title, and all the other stuff that we've been asking for. So this override mechanism, I find this, I think it would be very helpful to have something like this in place. Now, third, authorization. So as I said before, I use the device gen. It takes care of creating accounts, handling the logging in, emailing, password tokens, integrating with Sibylus. So it has it all, basically. And so there's a wiki, widely used, fairly easy to use if you know how authentication works. And now, if we What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I was thinking about like how should we do authorizations, and it seems like the REST API already has a lot of authorization code right there to its for use. So if the REST API would go ahead and give the requester information of what rights the requester has on an object, then the UI can make some informed decisions on what's allowed to do or not to do and whether to put a button or not. So I doctored, like I faked something, like I should say. So this here is a list of the top communities. If we look down here, what the REST API gave back to me, I faked that the read write, so the write list here. First one read, second one read, third one it says read, update, delete. So you would come up with like a list of like core actions that you would authorize for, and then you could fill the right fields in, and then your UI could make use of that. So now the way I implemented this making use part is if you were to look at the template that is behind that top list, you would see lines like show the button if the method can for this community says update is allowed. And then there's the helper method, and this is literally the whole method that I put in place. It asks the seeability object, can, knowing what I know about the requester, can the action object be applied? So if we look in this debug panel I did, the ability, since I'm logged in, this is all that Device gives me about the user being logged in, my email, my encrypted password, gazillion things. So I can use, in the ability object then, it decides to hand on the decision to the object. It asks the object, can this user do that action to you? And then the object might be DSpace object, or it might be one of the configuration stuff that the Rails application handles for its own purposes. And in the case of the DSpace object, it would just say, is the action listed in my rights field? In the case of my configuration stuff, I would probably use the user and have some role-based stuff and do my own decisions. So that way it kind of integrates easily with the UI. Now last, I'm not going to talk much about it. I have a gem. I started on this when I volunteered to generate test data for the UI challenge. And so I have a REST gem. It doesn't even do HTTPS, but what it does have is test cases. And test cases, so it tests out the interaction with the REST UI, whether the expected results are happening. And it's done with RSpec, which is widely used. It's very nice. You can really write like your listed tests once and then include them in collection community items, and then you have listed tests for all of them. And it's worth checking out. That's all I'm going to say about it, and I guess it's time for Kate to do her thing.
Thank you, Monika. Would it be helpful actually, is it best to do both these projects first and then go to Q&A? Is that the best thing to do? Sarah?
I think it's the fairest thing, because otherwise we'll be starting a lot of questions.
That's true.
You're running out of time, maybe.
So, Andrea, can you hand it over to Kate?
I need to.
On the quick start down, you will find the share screen.
Quick start. Yeah. Okay. So what I was going to do when I started working at the challenge, I wanted to create a Hydra hat which will talk to DSpace, not to Fedora. You know, probably everybody knows, but Hydra is a framework which allows you to build websites on top of Fedora, and application on top of Fedora websites, that way. And it's very popular because it's pretty easy to use, very complicated. what are working parts of hybrid? Active Fedora Jam, Blacklight, and also they have RTX. What DSpace is missing? It's missing DSpace, active DSpace. So my initial idea was to work on this jam. But, after Peter's presentation and Monika's presentation, I said that there is nothing I can add. And actually, I think this Brazilian jam is much better than I can come up with. So last weekend, I just decided that I will work on Autopart and Crippled and Blacklight in particular. And here it is. I took application which I already wrote, which used my version of DSpace Jam and talked to our DSpace instance and add Blacklight to the jam. And so now we have search, which we can easily customize. And we can also piggyback on Blacklight layout, because Blacklight is they have a whole process of good process of customization fully documented. You can rewrite any file. And now I can, for example, now I can show you how you can modify this static key. You go to Catalog Controller, and you can add subject sponsoring. Subjects, yeah. And if you want to get rid of it, that's it. Also, it's very easy to modify what you have. My own authorization. So. It's easy to modify what you see on your screen when you do the search. What fields will be displayed. Example here, if you want to see if you want to add constructor, and also you just uncomment the field. And also, again, you can modify your navigation easily. And as I said, it's integrated with an application which uses REST API. For example, here, it just it's not Blacklight, but it uses Blacklight layout. And probably that's all I want to say. That way, if you have Blacklight integration, you have DSpace, active DSpace, and you already have Hyper. So anybody can go and build, if they have some collection, they want to heavily customize. The collection is DSpace. They can build this application where they already have search and they build their own layout. For example, this podcast took me probably 5 hours to build. That's why there's so many errors, but because it was really easy to build. And that's how I see it. I think it will be an enhancement, and it will allow us to support modular structure. Because, for example, we have separate DSpace hybrid heads for collections. We have separate heads for statistics. But for some other stuff, for example, for administrative UI, we can use different modules. We can use JRuby. Instead of using REST API, we can use DSpace Challlenge. All that being said, as a DSpace administrator, I'm not sure I want DSpace to go completely Ruby on Rails. And the reason for that is, we'll be forced to support two application frameworks. We'll still have to run Java. And, for example, REST API, or we'll have to rewrite REST API, and I think, we don't want to rewrite it. And I think it will take not to rewrite. And so we will have this Java framework, like Tomcat, and then we'll have to set up Unicorn or any other Rails engine and bring them home. And also, I'm not sure, do we have enough Rails developers on board? That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Kate. So let me understand completely. The gem you used here, the DSpace REST gem you had used here was the Brazilian one?
No, it's mine.
Oh, it was your gem? Oh, okay. And you were just looking at the Brazilian gem and saying that it was a pretty good one. Okay. Okay.
Actually, would second that there is like 3 versions of DSpace gems now, and so there's a Brazilian one which is for featured, but I looked, they don't have any integration tests, and if you do want to go with supporting this integration through REST and Ruby at least, then or generally, if you want to have the REST API play a big role, you have to make sure it's properly tested. So I would be happy to work with the Brazilians and work on some integration, some testing, and integrate the two. Because I think even the tests could almost be plopped down in their gem as they are. But they're not I'm not testing everything. But that would be worthwhile pursuing, looking at the various gems we have for the REST integration and just combine them into one, take the best from wherever it is.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood what REST API gem or what gem was behind that, so that makes sense. And then I'd like to just first off thank Monika and Kate for presenting both of these and giving us a nice overview of what you've done and putting some time into kind of building something new, obviously, which is neat. At this point in time, I am going to go ahead and open up the floor to questions or discussion. If anybody else has other questions or points that they want to talk about a little bit more here with either of these. No questions yet. So I guess one point, obviously there's some parallels here with what you've done with, what's that?
Just one question.
Sure.
About Black Live. I was curious about integration for the search. I guess that it's not based REST API, but you have accessed the Solar server, yes?
Yes. You have to give Blacklight an access to Solar. You have to point Blacklight to your Solar.
So
Blacklight builds its own indexes, though, right? It's got its own Solar indexes, or does it use the DSpace ones?
You may teach Blacklight to your index.
Oh, okay.
Just the configuration, and then you need to do 3 things. You change Blacklight YAML file. You change because DSpace Solar use different unit different ID. You need to say what you want as an ID, and you need to so you use change one method in follow document model, and also you change your query, the query data. One method in your query data. That's it.
Okay. So you did all of those in this prototype then? You did those three things and pointed at DSpace's solar index? Okay.
Also, you need, if you want to use your REST application to run on different servers than your solar, you need to make sure that you are allowed to access solar. And there are some question about authorization and how to make sure that right application access the right part of solar index, but solar can Blacklight can take care of that.
Okay.
Because there's a field where you can put the restrictions on what data that applications are able to.
Okay.
And we had reach Blacklight applications here. We use it.
Blacklight pretty frequently then, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Actually, at Princeton, they have a dedicated person employed now. They want to change their whole catalog to run on Blacklight. The catalog searching at the library. And so that's why I knew about that Blacklight Summit, because it's over at the library. And there are a lot of institutions, libraries that use it because they want to get away from paying for their catalog software, basically.
Okay. Very good. Are there other questions here or comments?
I have some comments, I think. So the first one would be comments to Monika about your observation that you build a UI and you have to sort of take some of the things you do in terms of like access control, because it'll say the REST API doesn't tell me my authorizations if I'm allowed to edit or delete this thing I'm looking at. So I do agree about your observation that REST should give you information of can I modify something. That'd be interesting to add. I also saw in your code that there's some config types and values for your Rails app, so I was wondering if you could show that for a quick second.
See the code?
Not necessarily the code, but I think maybe I missed, or I don't know if you showed how you set configuration, because you said sometimes you use a core layout and sometimes you use like the library layout for a collection.
Oh, that was in the first part. Well, if I get the screen back, I can easily show this.
Yeah, it was just given back to you. Should be able to go back to the quick start menu and share your screen again.
Here in the meantime. Do I have to accept something, or do I just like magically get the screen?
Should be there. I think go to your quick start menu.
It's on the quick start tab.
Tab. Yes, quick start tab.
Oh. Okay, let's try that.
There you go. It looks like it's coming up. There it is.
See it now. So going back to so you wanted to know about the layouts, right? How does that happen? So if you look here, actually you should just look at let's look at that sitemap thing. I haven't pulled that up yet. So that's another layout. Now that's ugly to see. There's no layout there. Let's look at the core layout. So the way I configured the application is that every URL starts with what layout you want. And then after that, you see the regular way of how Rails routes are put together, community, 38, collection, whatever. So basically, I configured the application to have that layout information as the first part of the URL. And then what happens is that when this route mapping happens in Rails, it converts the routes into a parameter hash. That's all it does. And that's this parameter hash here. It says, this route tells me that I should run the collections controller, the action show, with the ID 373, and with the layout core. That's like because I doctored the way the route mapping is happening. And I did that in the routes RD file, and there's like one little snippet of code in the application controller that makes sure that this layout information is properly inserted into the parameters array here. And then I don't have to do anything special, because if you do, say, in your application render at the end of your controller, it will always, with the naming convention as our Rails is set up, go for whatever layout setting it has, and it already has the core layout, so you don't have to explicitly add that. And if I'm in the collections controller and I'm doing the show action, it's going to go for the template that sits in the collections array in the show.html ERB file. And it's going to use the layout parameter of that render action is already in my parameters array, the way I set this up, so that happens automatically.
Okay. And then is there a way for a user to switch between views or layouts without changing the URL, or is there?
Somewhere, I think. So basically, let's see, I might have it in the default layout. Did I add a sitemap link somewhere? Now, if you would want to do that, then you would say link to, and you give the add the additional parameter layout sitemap, for example, and to whatever else parameters you would have. And then it would go to the appropriate URL, basically.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you had like a configuration GUI or something like that in which you had some keys and values of just that default layout, or if certain collections could use a different layout.
I should go, actually, let's just pull up the IDE. So what I have is that route file that does the magic here. So this is the file that Rails uses to decide how to map URLs to this parameter array, basically, controllers, actions, layouts in my case. So I have this scope layout saying that every URL has to start with a layout parameter, layout component. And then after that, I have the normal way of defining resources in Ruby, where I say, well, I have a community resource and it can do these actions. And then this resources method generates the appropriate information for matching URLs to controllers and actions. And it's all naming conventions here. You can probably find that method somewhere and I don't know, try to figure it out. There's one other part I had to do to make this function cleanly, and I got that idea from the internationalization game. I think it's called URL encode. So I told it that, what do I do here? Oh, if I have a function that does this link to, or like there's all these link to functions that you use in view helpers. They generate the URL, and I had to tell those functions that there is a default value for the layout around, which I store in the C layout configuration variable, and I always send that along. So unless you say otherwise in your link to method that you're using, that you want, say, the layout sitemap, I'm going to use the currently active layout for the layout. And that way, people who are writing their views don't have to worry about staying in the layout and making sure like it stays the same.
Okay. And then
something like the way the internationalization then works, it does the same thing. It ends at the beginning, like en/de for the language code, and then it hands that information all the way around. So once you say, I want this in German, you stay with the DE language setting, and they do it the exact same way.
Okay. In your controller, you also have config types and config values controllers. Do you use those for anything?
Yeah, I can, I do. I have, so I'm logged in here. Now, because I'm logged in, I have this admin menu. You would imagine that there would be something more reasonable there. And so the thing I cannot do, I cannot edit. So if I look at the application name, it's set to DSpace demo. I can go edit this and say whatever demo today, right? And update the configuration. And it has the new value, and of course, then when we resolve configurations for application name, we get the mistyped demo today, and that's what we're using for the application name. So this is how it's done. I haven't figured out how to do the hash editing. There's something wrong, but you wouldn't want to do that live anyway. What I'm imagining what you could do, though, is you could imagine that you have like a type workflow, and you build something more sophisticated around this, and then you can define a whole workflow in as a value for so you would have a configuration variable workflow of the type workflow, or active workflow or use workflow for the type workflow, and then the type workflow would be something maybe you store in the database, and it's fairly sophisticated, whatever. And then you did use the configurations where then you attach workflows to collections or communities. And you would then, the reason I decided that configuration values should be typed is for that exact reason. Then when somebody wants to define a workflow value, you can then check whether this is a valid value. And I do some of that setting. I'm not sure whether it's worked, but I intended to make this work. So this item display is a hash. So if I go, say this particular value, do I have that edit there? Oh yeah, so if I try to edit this and say, I put a number, oh, well that doesn't work. I put a number in there, which clearly isn't a hash. It should barf at me. Well, it didn't do it, right? So, I guess the idea is it's like you can ask, is this a valid value for this type? And then you can make sure people don't enter complete garbage.
Well, thank you. That was interesting. That was good.
Yes.
Do you have other questions?
Back. Stop sharing, I guess.
If wants me to keep asking questions, I have questions for Ekaterina. So.
Well, I guess a general question I might ask, since we have three folks on here who've done Ruby on Rails prototypes, you included, Peter. Between the three of you and I guess everybody else on the call, something that Kate had mentioned at the end of her presentation there was that she wasn't sure that we should necessarily use Ruby on Rails because we'd be supporting two different platforms in terms of Ruby front end and a Java back end. And I just wonder what other people think of that. I guess I mean, it's something I've thought about as well, as whether or not that's something to be under deep consideration, but what do other folks think?
Well, I don't know. So here's another question. How many people do you think do not contribute because Java is the high bar? Right, that's the question. Right. So to consider. So you have a group of active people right now, but then there's people who don't contribute. Like, is the change to a new platform going to add something in terms of your body count, right? Right. Yeah, that's definitely something to consider. Yeah, I don't mean to ask it so controversially, but I'm just curious what other folks think. Yeah, go ahead, Monika. The other thing that I would caution with the Rails framework, right, it's like a plus and a minus. You cannot do Rails without doing tests. So you have to write the controller test and the review test. But you should be doing that anyway. If you don't do that, then eventually your Rails application will just not be, you will not understand why certain errors are happening. But then if you do have that integration testing, then, yeah, I guess you'll just have a better interface. And like the JSP UI, there's no tests whatsoever. And there's no way when I do changes that I can anticipate like all the clicks that I should be trying, right?
This is Jonathan. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
And this is, I think I am by far the least technical of all people on this call, so please excuse my naivete. I need to better understand this issue of working on two platforms. So a Rails application with DSpace has similar to a Hydra architecture on the Java API. Is that correct? That currently exists, or that would be improved upon. And that's what you mean by a Rails front end and a Java and the Java technology on the back end, right? And then in Rails we would create a gem which would serve as a sort of middle layer accessing the Java API. Is that what I'm understanding to be correct?
Either the Java API or the REST API, yeah.
So just to play devil's advocate, to speak to the argument that Rails, implementing Rails for the front end would encourage more community development. I'm curious. I know that Rails is fun for developers and a lot more productive for developers as well. But my understanding is that right now we have many contributors around the world who contribute to our releases, and they contribute mostly with sort of add-ons that I assume are front-end based, front-end heavy. And the last couple of releases have had over 50 contributors, I think, from around the world making these kinds of contributions. On the other hand, it's also my understanding that we have a dwindling set of developers working on the Java core for DSpace. Isn't that true? That I don't know that it's dwindling quickly, but it's very hard to attract new committers, new developers to work on this piece of DSpace. So my question is, where do we really need to encourage more development? Is it in the front end stuff, which even when you consider how lacking the front end technology is with our two different UIs, still we get a lot of contributions there. And on the other hand, I don't know that the Rails front end would do anything to encourage more development on the Java core. So I hope you understand my question. I'm trying to understand what that means.
No, it's a good observation. I think part of what you're pointing to a little bit is that almost there is a definite separation there. And as we start to build out this new UI, whatever platform we choose, we can choose to make that separation larger in some ways if we wanted to. And I think what you're kind of pointing at, Jonathan, a little bit, is that the Java API developers, the lower-level Java API developers, need not necessarily even be the same team as the team that's doing the UI. And we have a decision point here where we can start to spread those apart more. Where if we find people who really want to concentrate on the UI, they can do that. And if they're working in a different language than the folks on the back end, maybe that's okay. It may be that less people would jump between those two teams if they're in two different languages, unless we have people, learning both, which people do, obviously. But maybe that is an okay thing to start to tease those apart a little bit. I don't know if I have an answer to it, to what you're trying to ask, but I'm just trying to say it in a different sort of way.
Yeah, I think it just bears, trying to discussion so that we can understand that better.
Also, one reason I think there are more customizations in the UI is that the data structures underneath, the collections and the items and that kind of stuff, that's very well sort of established. And the user interface, everybody wants their own little thing. Right? And that's why you have your lots of customizations or on these UIs, right? And it starts with the logo, it goes on what color schemes, and goes on with like how things are listed and how you show your items, whether you show them with an image or not an image and this kind of stuff. So that's why you have more activity there, because the collections that you're representing to the API, they all look alike, but in the UI, people want to see them in different ways.
Right. Yep.
So, Peter.
You guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. This is Jeremy Cox over with the guys at Texas A&M, and just wanted to offer some sense, 2 cents of worth, I think, of observations on this Ruby Java question. Just from our perspective, this is something we've talked about a lot over here, and I know for our part, we do have Ruby code that we throw around in Chef for automated deployment of ERBs, and Ruby does get programmed in our shop, but even with that, we have been really hesitant diving into platforms that are on Ruby just for the very reason that was mentioned by Kate that really resonated, at least with me, of having to do that context switching between Java and Ruby was definitely something that gave us pause. It's always been perplexing to me that Fedora is in Java and all of the front-end solutions are in either PHP or Ruby. It seems like there was a real vacuum there in that context with a Java-based UI solution. And so for our part, it's not necessarily something that we couldn't do or wouldn't be willing to do, certainly, but we have definitely shown a hesitance around here of Ruby-based solutions for user interfaces for Java applications. So, just my 2 cents.
So I do understand that concern, and like a big fan of Rails, but like some of the ideas that are presented are really sort of agnostic to the framework. What I do with configurations, for example, you could do that just as well in Java. It would be more verbose, a little more clunky, but you could make that happen. And the same thing is the way I handle the authorizations could be done in Java. It's a one-to-one mapping. The way I sort of rigged the Rails application to inject these functions, that's just way more elegant doing this in Rails with Ruby, because you can do all this dynamic stuff much more easily with it's just method defined and should I be calling it and is there like an override template and that kind of stuff. And so 2 out of the 3 ideas that I presented are very transferable.
Yep. Yeah, definitely don't take any offense to any of this discussion. Monika, you've done great work and shown off cool stuff here. Yeah, and I think Kate showed off some other cool stuff as well with how Blacklight could be integrated, and Peter showed off some cool stuff last week with what he's done with the Ruby on Rails and that Rails gem. So I think there's a lot of potential here to, at the very least, give people the opportunity to start building UIs in Ruby, even if we don't choose that platform. If we do choose it, yeah, great. If we don't, there's opportunities where others could still run with that if they really wanted to, which is awesome.
The thing that Peter had that point in his presentation, I watched it in its canned version, that even if you don't do like a full-fledged Rails route, it does make sense to make sure that there is a REST API gem in Ruby, because after that, it's fairly easy to do a simple application, and then even if DSpace doesn't support that, what you can do is like have an example application together with the gem, and then let the student programmer or the little institution do their little customizations, and be relatively hands-off on the API end, on the UI end, right? What I see generally as a benefit is that the comparison you had with Texas had with Fedora isn't quite right, because Fedora is really just representing the objects. It doesn't deal at all with workflows, for example, or work items or whatever else is in the DSpace API. What hopefully will come out of this effort is that these parts are going to be teased apart much more cleanly, which is sort of an amorphous mess in the DSpace API directory, right? And yeah, that'll be a benefit no matter which way you're going.
Right. Yeah. So we're almost at the top of the hour here. We're running out of time, but I do want to see if there's any last comments or last questions before we start to close up.
Very, very interesting, Kate and Monica. Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation.
I think between this and Peter's work, it's obvious that there's a lot of opportunity here for someone to do a UI in Ruby on Rails and hook all this stuff in. And it definitely points to the fact that at the very least we need to make sure that our REST API continues to do very well and enhance itself so we can have these gems in Ruby and other sort of plugins for other languages as folks want to use them.
Can I ask you guys a question? So the one thing with this whole UI effort, you have like big advocates for user experience type stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to see the community to try to put somebody like that in that thinks about not the technology necessarily, but sort of how the UI should be organized to be perceived as functional. It's just not a question of Rails or Bootstrap. I think it's a question of how you organize the workflow or the flow through the application. And somebody who's good at that, I think it could be a great benefit no matter which way this is going.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. I mean, if you know of anybody who'd be willing to donate time, I don't know that we have money, too much money at least, but if we can find people who are willing to donate time or be interested in that, I think we'd love to have that opportunity of somebody to do an information architecture review or whatever.
Putting an announcement out because like the non-technical people might not feel like they should be part of this.
Right.
Kind of like.
I think it would be an opportunity to put out an announcement and see if anybody comes. That would be nice to be able to get somebody with that expertise, for sure.
I've got to go, folks.
Hey, Jonathan.
If I can jump in with a trailing question. So even though I'd love to talk about philosophical questions of user interfaces, maybe we should table that for outside of this presentation, like immediately afterwards. But I guess a follow-up question or comment to Ekaterina about the Blacklight version was that's actually a very, very interesting thing that it adds to the potential for DSpace, because you would say there is this huge community of the Fedora Hydra users, and there is a huge community of DSpace users, and there's also, as we're showing from this past few weeks, there's a little community of DSpace plus Ruby users, and so we have these like Rails gems or whatever, Ruby gems. So those two communities have, your Venn diagram has a lot of overlap, and you would say this Blacklight, this Hydra. I guess the question, maybe quick question for Kate would be, you're using Blacklight, and that's the solar-powered search engine for Rails, but that's not necessarily the same thing as like Sophia or whatever that's called.
Actually, Sophia is an attempt to build an institutional repository on top of using Hydra approach. And what made me think about Hydra has for DSpace is Sophia discussions. I heard people discussing if they need to use communities and collections or just collections. And I remembered that we had this discussion in DSpace community 10 years ago. So I think we already have developed data model. And probably, Hydra community can benefit from from the ability to use both Fedora and DSpace. And probably it's easier to build, Hydra has on top of DSpace than on top of Fedora.
Mm-hmm.
But I looked at Sophia. They try to build workflows but they try to do what DSpace is already doing.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there's another point with this discussion that I just realized that So I'm on the Hydra email list just because I like to learn. And so they're all raised people, and they develop this and they develop that, and then now they have a working group that is going to work on the workflow integration. So this is all going to be Ruby and then ready to be integrated with the Rails application. So if it is true that, well, I don't know, to some extent I think it is true that whatever Hydra development is done, say we were interested in doing some workflow that would be similar to what DSpace, the other UIs were doing, then, I don't know, you could go onto a working group like that and work together with the Hydra people to have a base gem handling that, right? So there's this big Hydra community, they all do Rails, but some of the stuff they do would be relevant for a DSpace UI as well, right?
True. Yeah, that is true.
So Fedora is
Go ahead, Peter.
Fedora is a much more flexible option, but it requires a lot of configuration and coding to sort of make what you're trying to get function that way. But at least with DSpace, we would say we all have sort of this predefined data model, this predefined framework for how DSpace functions as an IR. Like, it has community collections, items, bit streams, and so I don't think any of us are trying to change that model. We're trying to make small tweaks to it. Like next year, I think we're going to try to merge communities and collections because they have a lot of overlapping things. But so anyways, small changes, they're not big picture changes. But I wonder if you could almost plug in this DSpace Rails, this Blacklight into Hydra, the Sophia app, and just say, okay, this is a backend for that framework that is, let's say the word restricted or frozen, in which you can't change certain of these parameters because that's just sort of the DSpace way. But then I guess you would say with REST API or whatever interface you have, the things that are configurable, such as if DSpace's workflow can add optional, accept, submit, reject step, or whatever that's called. Maybe I'm just thinking you would just continue to enhance DSpace's REST API and your integrations with it and say, okay, whoever has a good use for it, that would be the direction to go.
But there's this, what I think about our IR as thinking about the prototype what's happening?
Looks like we got several people talking at once.
So the way I've been thinking about the prototype was mainly for displaying stuff, not so much for uploading items and submitting things. And once you start doing that, you get a much bigger application. And I don't know whether this is a huge effort, and I don't know whether it's even possible to have a transition where you just worry about the public display of stuff, and then later on you worry about all this uploading and administrative stuff, adding it to the new prototype. Probably that would be funky. I don't know, just an idea.
So I think those are all good points and good questions I think that have been brought up here, and things to consider as we're going forward. I don't know that we have enough time to discuss them all today, of course, because we're kind of already over time. But I think it's stuff that it's worth us all thinking on more, and as we're going through the process of reviewing all of these prototypes and starting to design a UI platform, there's going to be plenty of opportunities for public feedback during that. And so if we can start to have those discussions within that public feedback forum, I think that'd be helpful in terms of if we start to move towards potentially wanting to do Ruby on Rails, then it's definitely a benefit to start to analyze what's going on in the Hydra community. Can we plug ourselves in there as well and help out there? If that doesn't come to be, then you could still have some people start to want to do that. If you're interested in that and want to keep building against that DSpace gem, it's kind of up in the air as to where we're going yet as we continue to review these. But I wanted to go ahead and wrap up today's meeting since we are already over time, and remind everybody as well that our next session, we have 3 more remaining, so we still have 3 more prototypes going on. The next one will be on Thursday, the same time. I'll send out the link before the meeting, and that's going to be folks from Chineka presenting their prototype using Spring MVC, a bunch of other Spring technologies, along with Site Mesh for building their prototype on their sort of UI platform. And then we got a couple more next week. So there's 3 more left, and then we'll start to discuss and figure out which prototypes seem to start to bubble up towards the top as we go here. But again, I'd like to thank Monika and Kate for your hard work today, and thank everybody else for the good discussion today, because I think there's been a lot of good points and nice discussion around the benefits of Ruby on Rails and what we could do in this opportunity if we wanted to go in that direction. And with that, I'll go ahead and close things up and see you all on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.